civil war going on between King Charles and Prince William. A lot of royalists don't want to believe this, hope that it's not true. And of course it is nasty, given this is a father and son who do love each other. Of course they love each other, but this is a battle over the future of the British monarchy. And I know a lot about this because I know the characters involved, and I also know that the Daily Mail, which is my former newspaper, is being used as the proxy in which to pump out this very unfair information about Prince William. And I think he has a right to be angry, and I think King Charles needs to call the attack dogs off, if I'm completely honest. And I'm going to be honest about this insane decision to hand Buckingham Palace to Prince Harry in just a matter of weeks after everything that he's done over the past month, including slamming the King's own judiciary.
A decision buried behind palace walls didn't just slip through quietly, it detonated, ripping open a royal fracture so raw, so volatile, that Prince William was forced into a move no one saw coming. A direct, explosive stand against King Charles himself. This isn't a disagreement. This is a power clash dressed as family drama. And every whispered detail feels like a warning sign the public was never meant to notice. Because when King Charles extended that invitation, yes, the one quietly offering Prince Harry a place inside Buckingham Palace, it wasn't hospitality. It was a signal that the doors to royal reintegration weren't just open, they were being forced wide, regardless of consequence. But here's where everything starts to unravel. Why now? Why risk everything the monarchy has spent decades stabilizing? And more importantly, why did Prince William react not with caution, but with immediate, unfiltered resistance? Because behind that invitation wasn't just a father reaching out. It was a move that blurred lines that were never meant to be crossed. And William saw it instantly. No hesitation, no diplomacy, just a hard line drawn in silence that suddenly became deafening.
Including deciding that he's going to go ahead with his battle against the British government. This, I'm afraid, folks, is a weakness that Prince William has always feared his father would show. And it's not that I don't have sympathy, you know, regular viewers know, of course I understand. King Charles is dying. He wants a relationship with his grandchildren. He wants to be seen as the king of forgiveness. But unfortunately, sometimes you have to make the tough calls. You know, like the tough calls that the late Queen Elizabeth II made to strip her favourite son, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, of all of his royal duties. This is madness. The reason that Harry was not allowed to stay at Buckingham Palace in the most recent visit is he intended to use it to make a political statement against the Daily Mail and the judiciary. What's he going to do next time? You don't know, Charles. Sources last night, so these sources trust me, Harry himself via Liam Maguire, indicated he will accept the fresh offer to stay at the palace well in advance this time.
Inside Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere reportedly shifted long before the public even caught wind. King Charles, described by insiders as emotionally driven, made a decision that many within the institution found deeply unsettling. Offering Prince Harry residence within the palace wasn't symbolic, it was structural. It was granting access to the very core of royal power. And that's where the contradiction begins to scream. Because how does a monarchy built on discipline allow re-entry for someone who stepped away, criticized the institution, and publicly exposed its inner workings? It doesn't add up. It never did. And the deeper you look, the more uncomfortable the questions become. Because this wasn't just about reconciliation, it was about credibility. If Prince Harry walks back in through those gates, what does that say about loyalty? About duty? About consequence? Suddenly, every past action loses weight. Every sacrifice becomes negotiable. And William, watching all of this unfold, saw something far more dangerous than a family reunion. He saw instability, he saw precedent, and he saw a monarchy at risk of losing its own definition.
I'm sorry, wake up! Harry doesn't know how to behave. Like, what more is it going to take for you to realize he doesn't know how to behave? What more? Like, think on the most recent visit. From the statement about the whitewash and the judiciary to the Joe Marler podcast, he proved he will never know how to behave. Brittany, am I going mad? Like, am I going mad? Am I the only one? who actually thinks that having Prince Harry literally being the only member of the royal family to effectively make his home Buckingham Palace could actually end up becoming some type of existential crisis for the monarchy.
This is just getting absolutely crazy when it comes to Harry and especially Charles. He just comes across as so incredibly weak here, indecisive, and unclear. Because one of the big things I have been talking about so endlessly is that you can have two sides here. There is the personal family side of things, where Charles as a father wants to connect with his son. We can all, from a human perspective, understand that. But there's also the dynastic one. And Charles is very unclear here where Harry stands on either side.
And then comes the part no one wants to say out loud, the security. Because Buckingham Palace isn't just a residence, it's a fortified nerve center, layered with confidential operations, sensitive communications, and state-level protections. So what happens when access is granted under emotional reasoning instead of calculated protocol? What happens when private corridors become potential entry points for exposure? This is where the whispers turn sharp, because the risks aren't hypothetical. They're immediate. Documented behavior, past disclosures, public storytelling patterns that suddenly don't look like isolated incidents, but part of something much bigger. And yet, despite all of that, the invitation stood, which raises the most unsettling question yet. What was King Charles willing to overlook to make this happen? That's the moment everything snapped. Not quietly, not subtly, but decisively. Prince William didn't just disagree, he intervened. And according to insiders, it wasn't a measured response. It was explosive. Because for William, this wasn't about emotion, it was about preservation, about protecting a system that has survived centuries precisely because it doesn't bend under pressure. And here's where the tension becomes impossible to ignore. On one side, King Charles torn between fatherhood and duty, navigating a personal longing that refuses to stay contained. On the other, Prince William calculating, unwavering, and increasingly stepping into a role that feels less like heir and more like enforcer. The contrast is stark, and it's growing sharper by the day, because while Charles hesitates, William acts. While Charles softens, William tightens control. And somewhere in between, the monarchy itself is being pulled in two directions that may not be able to coexist much longer. But if you think this is where it peaks, it doesn't. Because what truly pushed Prince William over the edge wasn't just the palace invitation. It was something far more personal, something buried in memory, in grief, in a promise that was never supposed to be broken. Althorp House, Princess Diana, and a line that once crossed couldn't be ignored. Because when private grief becomes public narrative, when sacred spaces turn into staged moments, something shifts. And for William, that shift wasn't just uncomfortable, it was unacceptable. Years of silence, of restraint, of protecting what little remained untouched suddenly disrupted. And not quietly, not respectfully, but in a way that felt deliberate, calculated, almost strategic. The deeper this spirals, the less it feels like a disagreement and the more it feels like a countdown, because everything that followed didn't just confirm Prince William's fears. It amplified them into something far more irreversible. The cracks that started with a single invitation widened into a pattern, and that pattern kept circling back to one thing: Prince William could no longer ignore Princess Diana's memory being pulled into something it was never meant to become. What happened at Althorp House didn't just sting. It detonated something that had been held together by discipline for decades. Because for Prince William, Princess Diana was never a narrative, never a public asset, never something to be repackaged or revisited for attention. Princess Diana was sacred ground, and that ground had rules that had been agreed upon, protected, and followed with absolute silence. But then something shifted, and that silence was broken in a way that felt deliberate. The appearance of imagery, the suggestion of moments captured near Princess Diana's resting place, the quiet circulation of those details, it didn't feel accidental. It felt orchestrated. And for Prince William, that was the line. Because what had once been a shared understanding between Prince William and Prince Harry, an unspoken boundary built on loss, now looked like it had been rewritten. Not through conversation, not through agreement, but through action. And that action didn't just challenge Prince William emotionally, it challenged the very idea of restraint that the monarchy relies on to survive. This is where the contradiction becomes impossible to dismiss. palace. Because while Prince William maintained absolute privacy around visits to Althorp House, ensuring that Princess Diana remained untouched by spectacle, the emerging pattern suggested a completely different approach elsewhere. And once that contrast became visible, it couldn't be unseen. It raised questions that no official statement could smooth over. Why turn something so personal into something visible? Why risk crossing a boundary that had been so clearly defined? And more importantly, why now, at a moment when tensions inside Buckingham Palace were already reaching a breaking point? Because when you connect these events, they don't sit separately. They overlap. The palace invitation, the emotional reasoning behind it, the sudden push for proximity to royal spaces, the subtle but undeniable shift in how Princess Diana's legacy was being handled. It all starts to look less like coincidence and more like momentum. And that momentum, from Prince William's perspective, was heading in a direction that threatened to blur everything the monarchy depends on: privacy, discipline, hierarchy, and control. And this is where the atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace reportedly turned colder, sharper, more calculated. Because Prince William didn't just react to one event, Prince William responded to a sequence. A sequence that suggested something deeper was unfolding beneath the surface. And when that realization set in, the response wasn't emotional anymore. It was strategic. Because if boundaries could be crossed once, they could be crossed again. And if those boundaries involved Princess Diana, then nothing was off limits anymore. At the same time, the external pressure was building in a way that only made the internal situation more volatile. Public perception, already stretched thin by years of ongoing tension, began to shift in ways that reflected fatigue rather than curiosity. The appetite for unresolved conflict was fading, and in its place was a growing expectation for clarity, for strength, for direction. And that's exactly where Prince William stepped in, not as a voice of compromise, but as a figure of finality. Because what Prince William made clear, both internally and through action, was that there would be no gradual easing back into royal structure, no halfway return, no symbolic gestures that could be interpreted as forgiveness without accountability. The line had been drawn, and it wasn't subtle. It was firm, visible, and immovable. And that line wasn't just about access to Buckingham Palace, it was about the future of the monarchy itself. Because if Prince William allowed this moment to pass without resistance, it wouldn't just redefine one relationship, it would redefine the rules entirely. And that was a risk Prince William refused to take. Not quietly, not cautiously, but decisively. And now everything hangs in that decision, because King Charles, still navigating the weight of personal connection, remains positioned on one side of a divide that is no longer invisible. And Prince William, stepping further into authority with every passing moment, stands on the other guarding something that cannot afford to bend. So the real question isn't whether this situation can be resolved, it's whether the structure holding it together can withstand the pressure being placed on it from within. Because once lines like these are drawn, they don't fade, they hold, they define. And sometimes they mark the exact moment everything changes, even if the world hasn't fully realized it yet.